Hello everyone, welcome to our presentation on the gig economy and COVID-19. At Fairwork, we study the gig economy model. What is the gig economy? Gig economy is jobs that are mediated through a digital platform, usually outside of the work-employment relationship, and they are relatively short-term jobs that matches supply and demand for different types of services such as food delivery, ride hailing, as well as online jobs such as translation, transcription, or um, this web design. At Fairwork Project, we have developed five principles for fair gig work. And these are fair pay, fair conditions, fair contracts, fair management, and fair representation. And we evaluate platforms against these five principles and how they provide work to the people to the people that work on their platforms. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we have noticed that platforms that we studied, as well as platforms that were outside the countries in which Fairwork is currently outside the countries in which Fairwork is currently working in, they were releasing policies with respect to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we wanted to have a look at these policies in a more systematic way. So we analyzed platform policies across, initially in April 2020, across 120 platforms in 23 countries across Europe, North America, South America, Asia, and Africa. After our first report was released in April 2020, we noticed that these policies were no longer active, or they were changed as the pandemic also continued to change. So in September 2020, we released a second report which covered more number of countries, 43, and more number of platforms, 191, across Europe, North America, South America, Asia, and Africa. And the reason we wanted to expand our focus in the second report was also to be able to understand how different platforms in both the developing countries context as well as the high-income countries context were providing policies to their workers. We categorize platform responses according to the five Fairwork principles that our ongoing action research uses to rate platforms against decent work standards. Shortly, I will show some of our policy cards, our analysis, but I should highlight that we did not find specific policies for fair contracts and fair representation. That is why our analysis focused mainly on fair pay, fair conditions, and fair management. At the report, I can summarize our findings into five short sentences. For fair pay, we found that by far it was the most important issue for workers, yet only 10% of platforms that we surveyed provided pay loss compensation specifically to their workers. With fair conditions, we found out that contactless delivery sort of became the norm, and platforms often issued guidance on hygiene and the use of PPE. Yet there was also concerns raised by the workers that workers were not able to access this PPE, or they struggled to get compensated if they were asked to pay upfront and then get reimbursements later on. We also saw that sick leave policies were common, but these were mostly very hard to access, or they paid less than the minimum wage, and they did not often provide the same level of income as the workers would earn had they been able to work during the pandemic if they had not been sick. With fair management, we found that few platforms guaranteed no loss of ratings if workers were not able to work, and they often did not include incentives despite low levels of work. And only very few platforms pledged to anti-discrimination policies, which became an issue in some countries where consumers specifically ask certain group of people not to serve them. So if you look at our platform scorecards, we listed the platforms and how they compared in terms of the different policies they had in terms of fair pay, fair conditions, fair management, and fair representation. And each dot corresponds to an existing policy. Um, this scorecard was last updated in September 2020. So I need to highlight that things might have changed since then, and the existence of a policy when we made a scorecard uh, does not necessarily mean that that policy is still active and it's still providing help to the workers now. As you can see, we evaluated various platforms that are providing various services, but these were mostly geographically tethered platforms. They were all actually geographically tethered platforms, meaning that they were offering location-based services and not online cloud services. And that is because it is highly difficult to understand the specific COVID-19 policies of the cloud work platforms. And also because gig workers, location-based gig workers, were considered key workers in many countries across the world. Yet they still lacked access to government-led funds, or they lacked access to certain healthcare policies that were offered to full-time employees. Our key findings can be summarized in different ways. Perhaps the most important thing to say is that what workers want and need is to maintain their income, but platforms continue to leave this to the government. Furthermore, as the pandemic continues, competition in the sector has grown, and that has driven down pay as many people who has lost their jobs during the pandemic started to take up jobs in the gig economy. More platforms we observed offered hygiene guidance and protective equipment to workers, um, but these became sort of compulsory by the governments in the duration of the pandemic. So this guidance sort of ended up being more of a government policy than a specific platform policy. Platform responded. Platforms' responses changed throughout the pandemic as well. Some we observed that prioritize serving shareholders, investors, and customers before workers. And this meant that some health and safety measures were not particularly administered during the pandemic, and this affected the risks platform workers were taking. And we also observed that due to the lack of support during the pandemic, platform workers started to engage in worker strikes, especially in across Latin America. This could be visibly seen. But we also have observed that some platforms took an initiative against workers organizing and actively tried to punish some workers for that. Looking ahead, we we need to observe what is happening in the gig economy now, and how COVID-19 is affecting gig economy workers. We observed that some platforms signal disaster capitalism, and what we mean by this is that they are showing signs of turning the pandemic into profit by expanding their operations and businesses into new sectors, into new countries, while drawing away from less lucrative ones, and sort of using the pandemic as a way to justify and legitimize these actions. And we need to sort of understand and emphasize that COVID-19 continues to spread across the world with new variants, and gig workers continue to face challenging conditions, and there's little information about what kind of help is available to the gig workers once the official policies of the platforms expired, and this was already a concern when we published our report in September 2020, and since then things also continue to become since then COVID-19 still continued, and workers continue to face important risks. And it's also important to emphasize that there is not a standard government policy on offering priority vaccination to gig workers at the moment, even though they're considered key workers. And this is also one of the challenging factors to keep in mind going forward. Thank you for listening, and if you would like to read our report, it's available on our website, fair.work, and you can always reach out to us if you have any questions, comments on our social media channels, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.